Prime Minister Mark Carney will make his second trip to the American capital on Monday, even with the United States in the middle of a government shutdown, where he'll hold meetings at the U.S. Capitol and at the White House, his second since he took office. And it comes at a moment where trade tensions between the two countries remain at a steady boil. Joseph Steinberg is a professor with the University of Toronto's Economics Department. Great to chat with you this morning, Joseph. We don't know the exact details of the Prime Minister's agenda, but the free trade agreement between Canada, the U.S. and Mexico, which is up for review next summer, will likely be a part of the conversation. Now, the U.S. ambassador to Canada has said an extension isn't likely, but that doesn't mean that USMCA or CUSMA is ending, correct?
That's correct. I think what's really important for viewers to understand is that CUSMA is currently scheduled to expire not until 2036. So it's got a 16-year duration. What we're looking for in this first review coming up next summer is to try to come to an agreement for another 16-year extension, which would push the agreement all the way out up until 2052. So if that fails, the worst case, we're still under the status quo until 2036.
So, I mean, Trump obviously played a pretty significant role here in getting kind of a new NAFTA put in place. But at the same time, he seems to be either sidelining it or undercutting it entirely with his tariff policies. I mean, how do you square that circle with what the president is doing with his own agreement?
It's a great question. As an economist, it's always hard to look at this and try to apply a purely rational lens to President Trump's tariff policies. Some of it, I think, is just quite frankly, President Trump likes tariffs. And that I think in his second administration, he feels like he has, I think, a lot more leeway to pursue his kind of own subjective interests, perhaps more so than he did during his first administration. That said, I think it is also important to recognize that President Trump has not completely sidelined, or really, I would say, mostly sidelined CUSMA. Canada is in a fairly unique position currently relative to other countries around the world. The effective tariff rate on our exports to the United States is about 3%. Now, there are some certain sectors, steel, aluminum, and autos are the big ones, that are getting hit with higher tariffs. But aside from that, pretty much everything that we're sending to the United States is tariff-free. And that's quite different than pretty much every other country around the world except for Mexico. And it's even quite different than South Korea. You'll note South Korea also has a free trade agreement with the United States, although not one that President Trump himself negotiated. And South Korea has across-the-board tariffs on all of its exports to the United States. So Canada is, in fact, in a somewhat unique position relative to other U.S. trade partners, in that my interpretation of the way things are going right now is that CUSMA has not been, mostly sidelined. CUSMA is still mostly in operation.
The Prime Minister's visit to D.C. comes a month and a half after he made some pretty hefty concessions here, ending those retaliatory tariffs. That didn't stop Trump. Obviously, we saw layered softwood lumber tariffs just last week. How bad could the economic pinch here be for both countries, regardless of its, steel or aluminum or softwood lumber?
I think the economic pinch on Canada is, as certainly in certain sectors, it's hitting us pretty hard. The steel and aluminum sectors are getting hit quite hard, particularly steel. The automotive sector is also under a lot of pressure. I look at all of this and I say, though, that the biggest elephant in the room here is the uncertainty that both economies are going to continue to face for the duration of these negotiations. These CUSMA negotiations could go on for many years at this point. The way CUSMA is designed is that starting in 2026, the three countries essentially have to continuously negotiate to try to find an agreement to extend the trade framework. And until they do so, they're going to kind of continuously be negotiating. And so, while 2036 is a long way away, I think it is very difficult for businesses, especially manufacturers in all three countries, to commit to making any kind of big decisions until they have some more certainty about where things are headed. And so I see, the biggest kind of source of economic drag, in Canada, but also in the United States, is going to be automakers and other big manufacturers, I think, are going to hesitate to make big investment decisions for, as long as these negotiations are taking place.
Last question here. You mentioned that Canada's in a pretty good situation right now because of a fairly low effective tariff rate. So, I mean, with the Prime Minister in D.C., is it worth pushing for a deal, or is it worth kind of looking at sectoral relief, or are both of those kind of just dead in the water at this point?
So, number one, I think Canada should not, under any terms, sign a deal that involves across-the-board tariffs. Right now, we don't have across-the-board tariffs. I don't think the Prime Minister should agree to anything that involves, across-the-board tariffs, even if a couple of percentage points on our exports to the United States. So that's my first view. The second view is I think there is potential in certain sectors for substantial relief. I think aluminum is one that some of the president's advisors have even talked about. The U.S. automakers are really under a lot of pressure with the rising cost of aluminum. Aluminum is really important for the production of, say, the F-150, the Ford F-150 truck. And I think the automakers really are under a lot of economic pressure and getting hit a lot by these tariffs. And so I think there is this, meaningful potential for some relief on aluminum and perhaps in autos more generally.
All right, we will leave it there. Joseph Steinberg at U of T, thanks for making time for us today.
Yeah, you're welcome.